Today's podcast is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at washingtech.com/book. Over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player.
Moving the needle. Welcome to the Washington Policy Podcast.
Curating communications, media, and tech policy news so you don't have to. News, interviews, everything you need without the axe to grind. It's the Washington Tech Policy Podcast with Joe Miller.
The State Department's Inspector General concludes Hillary Clinton violated the Federal Records Act, Oracle loses its copyright suit against Google, and Bruce Lincoln is my guest. The State Department's Inspector General has found Hillary Clinton violated the Federal Records Act because she didn't preserve all of her emails and submit them to the State Department when she left office. To be fair, though, the report also found former Secretary of State Colin Powell, who also exclusively used his private email account to conduct official business, also failed to preserve all of his emails. The report also found senior IT security officers working at the State Department were not asked to approve Clinton's use of a private email server. The Clinton campaign issued a response to the Inspector General's report in which it maintained Clinton's practices were not illegal at the time and consistent with practices of former secretaries of state. Google has won the copyright case brought against it by Oracle. Oracle had sued Google for violating Oracle's copyright in its Java APIs. Oracle claimed that Google, in Google's haste to develop Android, ripped off Java. The federal jury in the Northern District of California, though, found that Google's use of Java was a fair use. Back in 2012, the same judge who presided over this case, Judge William Alsup, ruled that APIs were not subject to copyright protection, but that ruling was overturned on appeal. Oracle has vowed to appeal this case as well. Microsoft announced last week that it is cutting 1,850 jobs in its smartphone business. The company acquired Nokia just 2 years ago, and since then, the acquisition has proven disastrous, with over 25,000 employees let go since then, as Microsoft failed to develop a smartphone that can compete effectively with Apple and Google. Apple has hired John Callis, a prominent cryptography expert, as the company continues to oppose federal law enforcement officials seeking backdoor access to iPhones to conduct criminal investigations. Reuters notes that Callis has founded at least 3 successful secure communications companies. The American Civil Liberties Union has filed a motion to support Microsoft in its lawsuit against the Justice Department. The company sued Justice last month, claiming gag orders that prevent it from disclosing to customers when their information has been subjected to a search warrant are unconstitutional. Google's forthcoming Allo messaging app is not secure enough, so says Edward Snowden. The app offers end-to-end encrypted messaging, but it's turned off by default. Users who want to take advantage of Allo's end-to-end encryption feature have to use it in incognito mode. Snowden tweeted that users should avoid Allo for now since it doesn't offer end-to-end encryption by default like other messaging applications such as WhatsApp. Allo is expected to be released to consumers as early as this summer. A coalition of more than 50 tech companies and advocacy groups, including Yelp, Mozilla, Meetup, Medium, Kickstarter, the Future of Music Coalition, Common Cause, and the Center for Media Justice, sent a letter to FCC commissioners last week asking them to ensure the agency's review of zero rating practices are kept public and open. Zero rating is the practice by which ISPs offer their customers access to some applications without it counting against their data caps. Advocates are concerned that zero rating practices will make ISPs preferred content more attractive to consumers since accessing it does not count against their monthly data allotment. So, for example, if your ISP has an agreement with YouTube to offer YouTube without it counting against your data cap, you may be less likely to watch the same music video on Vimeo. Finally, members of the Congressional Black Caucus sent a letter to the Department of Labor last week requesting that the agency require tech companies with large government contracts to write affirmative action plans. Stay with us. For Washington Tech Policy Podcast listeners, Audible is offering a free audiobook download with a free 30-day trial to give you the opportunity to check out their service. How about Mindset, The New Psychology of Success by Carol Dweck? You can download Mindset free by trying audible.com. Sign up for your free audiobook and 30-day trial today at washingtech.com/book. My guest today is Bruce Lincoln. Bruce is the co-founder of Silicon Harlem, which is focused on transforming Harlem into a hub for tech and innovation. He is also a senior fellow of the Columbia University Institute for Tele-Information at the Columbia Business School and was previously the entrepreneur in residence at Columbia's Center for Technology, Innovation, and Community Engagement. Bruce has been involved in cutting-edge technology product development and technology commercialization since the late 80s, when, as the first Ford Fellow in Education Technology, he was one of the early CD ROM content developers for Apple. He also developed the first program to bring broadband to public schools in New York City. Please welcome Bruce Lincoln. Bruce, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Joe. It's a pleasure to be here.
Since the 1980s and 90s, Silicon Valley has always been considered the epicenter for startups and tech. But several cities are vying for the top spot. The city of New York is no exception. And the city has witnessed explosive growth in tech and startups, first under former Mayor Michael Bloomberg and now under Mayor Bill de Blasio. A recent study commissioned by Google, the Association for a Better New York Tech Meetup, and Citibank found there are upwards of 291,000 tech jobs in New York City. It also found New York City's tech ecosystem generates some $50.6 billion in compensation for employees in both direct and indirect tech-related employment. And the average tech wage in New York is $39.50 an hour compared to an average of just $26.50 across all other occupations in the city. So New York City's growth in tech is clear. But how is this growth affecting underserved communities? And what can organizations do to ensure wider participation among groups that are traditionally underrepresented in the tech sector? One great program is Silicon Harlem. So Bruce, thank you so much for joining me.
Hey, Joe, it's a real pleasure to be here, and I'm excited about the kind of conversation we can have today, because this is a very important topic, and this simply doesn't affect underrepresented communities. This is where the economy is going overall. So it's important that we have parity at the outset.
Now, Bruce, I know Michael Bloomberg did a lot to build New York City's Silicon Alley, but tell us about how New York City's current mayor, Bill de Blasio, has built on that foundation to make it a more inclusive tech sector.
That's a great question, and that's exactly the evolution that we see. One of the things that has been the hallmark of de Blasio's administration is focusing on access to jobs in the tech sector and how that can be used as a way to ameliorate the growing inequality in the city of New York. Towards that, he appointed Maya Wiley as his deputy chief counsel, and she manages a number of things. One is the One NYC plan. It's designed to make sure that women and minorities are now at least 1/3 of the contracts led by the city, as well as having a role in larger contracts that go to prime contractors. So that focuses on one, ubiquitous and universal affordable broadband. And towards that, they formed the Mayor's Broadband Advisory Task Force, of which I'm a member. And what we look at is how to make sure that every community has access to broadband, both from the standpoint of low-cost fiber to high-speed wireless that in many respects they're making free. So what we've seen here in the city of New York, and we even had a meeting in December at the Ford Foundation, they are equating access to broadband as a social justice issue. And that's unprecedented in America. So that turns into a number of different programs. One, computer science for all. We want to make sure that every student all the way down to first grade has access to coding and what that means as far as computational and design skills. The expansion of STEM opportunities. So you see a lot of nonprofits that are moving into this STEM and coding space. You see organizations like the Knowledge House in the South Bronx or the Coalition for Queens or Silicon Harlem, who are in specific communities where they're trying to grow the tech sector. So what you're starting to see is this inclusive tech ecosystem where we're taking the lead around how this really drives economic development. And it's very exciting when you start to see this. And then we still have a lot of work to do. If you still go to certain venues and certain meetings, people like you and I are a handful in the audience. But the fact that they are trying to move it out from Silicon Alley into Harlem, into the Bronx. They're trying to expand Digital Dumbo in Brooklyn to where it's also in Bed-Stuy and Bushwick. So it's a real impressive start. And it's part of a 10-year plan to create this type of, as you alluded to, inclusive tech sector.
I love what I'm seeing. So tell us a little bit about Silicon Harlem. I came to your workspace with the coffee shop and the theater, and it was just such a great place. I wish we had one in D.C., MIST. Can you tell us a little bit about MIST, and then tell us a little bit about Silicon Harlem and the need it's designed to address?
Yeah, I'll tell you about the two, and it'll be a way to give people a sense of our history. Silicon Harlem actually began as a proposal for broadband stimulus funding, and it was submitted when I was the entrepreneur in residence at the Columbia School of Engineering. And the idea was to address issues of the digital divide and access to digital employment by creating telework centers that were connected to a very high speed wireless network, and in that way really drive our inclusion in the innovation economy. That proposal wasn't funded, but we continued to focus on Silicon Harlem and basically reshaped it into a for-profit social venture. So that ties us into MIST, My Image Studios, which is the venue you were alluding to that's on 116th Street between Lenox and Fifth Avenues. That's a 20,000 square foot entertainment venue. So that's where we started out in February 26th of 2013, where we had 500 people that looked like you and I come because they were focused on tech. We've since grown that audience by doing 35 meetups, all of which range between 250 and 500 people per event. And now not only do we use MIST on 116th Street as our venue for events, as we talked about earlier, our last tech debate was there, but we also now are located at the CUNY iHub. That's it. Innovation Center on 125th Street, where we actually have our own office space where we can work with the different companies that have become a part of our portfolio. So we're very excited about how we're moving forward as this whole tech sector in Upper Manhattan is starting to grow.
And Silicon Harlem has an apps youth development community. Can you tell us about what that is and how students can get involved?
That began as part of an initiative to basically get young people in high school, especially young people of color, involved in entrepreneurial training. It began as the Apps Youth Leadership Academy, and it's now grown to the Tech Startup Accelerators. Not only do we have what will be our third year of having 20 young people learn how to build tech startups in a very intensive summer program, we also are starting to work with the Department of Education to develop a program that can take place in schools in after-school settings. And that works with 10 to 20 students. And in 10 workshops, they learn in this sort of rapid development process how to build wireframes for a smartphone app and to build a tech startup, and then actually present that pitch deck that's associated with that startup. So we're really trying to instantiate what we do into larger programs across the city of New York.
And what are some of those programs? How does Silicon Harlem work with some of the rest of the
we're working with the
programs in New
Department
York?
of Education, specifically with their Youth Career Connects program. That is an area of the city where the funding comes from the Department of Labor. So they take a portion of the funds that are set aside for H-1B visas, and now that's committed to making sure young people get access to coding as well as entrepreneurial opportunities through internships and direct training.
Now, the H-1B visa issue is controversial here in town. How does it work for Silicon Harlem? Are these allocated for students of color who are immigrants?
No, this is kind of ties into that. So the idea is that you have the H-1B visas, which are used to provide visas for immigrant workers in tech. But the case was made, why don't we take a portion of those funds, and Obama drove this and committed to students of color who live here locally who should be involved in the tech sector.
I see.
Students are African American, they're Afro Latino, they're Afro Caribbean. They're also white kids from working class neighborhoods, all of which have been affected by the tech sector. So we recruit from the top computer science schools, and what those schools do is then provide us with these top flight students.
So which schools do you recruit from?
We work with the Urban Assembly Gateway School for Technology, which is 5 years old. They will be graduating their second senior class this year. We work with the Academy for Software Engineering. They're 4 years old, and they'll be graduating their first graduating class. So we've had the pleasure of working with those schools. We also work with the Bronx Academy for Software Engineering. We work with a great school called the Young Women's Leadership Academy. We had 7 young women in our first cohort 2 years ago, and the students have gone to such schools as Smith College, Fordham University at Lincoln Center, New York Tech College. So we're very proud of these students. And as part of this growing movement under Computer Science for All, to make sure that all students are exposed to computer science.
And what have been some of Silicon Harlem's results in its attempts to stimulate entrepreneurship in Harlem and beyond?
Well, what we are able to sort of look at is the growth of tech startups. There was a time when our entrepreneurs were sort of local community-based entrepreneurs. And of course, we still have a focus on, mom and pops and bodegas. But our entrepreneurs look like everyone else's. They're highly educated. A great many of them have had successful corporate careers, and then they've moved to entrepreneurship. And we've been looking at what is potentially our first unicorn company, where the developer, who is an African-American woman, has created a micro generator. And that what allows for power to be created on the local level. So it ranges from entrepreneurs who are very focused on social ventures to companies that have decided not to locate in Silicon Valley, but to locate in Silicon Harlem.
And tell me about some of the programs you're doing for traditional mom and pop businesses. That sounds interesting. Usually we just hear about stimulation these days for tech companies and app developers. What are you doing for existing local businesses?
Well, for existing local businesses, what we're working on is making sure that they all have low cost and affordable access to the broadband internet. And then over that, we can look at how they can now start to use social media, how they can start to have websites. We still have programs through continuing professional studies at City College. That's focused on developing web skills. But we know we've got to move that down to where it's also basic computer skills.
I wonder if there's anything being done in e-commerce to, I don't know, I don't know what how to help these businesses. I was just wondering if there's some ideas out there.
Well, I say it's a combination of things. One, it's not simply access to the plain vanilla wrapper internet. It's the internet that's focused on providing those services. So a website, a social media strategy, and then ways to drive e-commerce. But more so, it's important that it's not just a single company that's connected to the web, but that they work as part of a supply chain. So we're working very closely with the Greater Harlem Chamber of Commerce around that issue, as well as the Harlem Community Development Corporation.
Interesting. I love that idea, the supply chain idea. That's awesome. Because there's so much competition from Amazon and others. It's just almost insurmountable, but strength is in the network, definitely. But what are some of Silicon Harlem's aspirations going forward? Where do you see Silicon Harlem 5 years from now?
What we see ourselves is as part of the larger innovation economy here in the city of New York. And we're going to be involved in that in a number of different ways. One, we now are focused on building an innovation center, a physical setting where not only can you grow tech startups, but you also can provide access to the community. We also are very interested in making sure that there's ubiquitous internet access, not only in Harlem, but in underserved communities all over the city of New York. So we're very focused on the development of a template that could be used, which draws on stakeholders. Those stakeholders would be mom and pops, bodegas, as you said, but also the key institutions here in Harlem: City College, Columbia University, the Harlem Children's Zone, the Boys and Girls Club of Harlem. We have a particular focus on STEM. That we think is the means whereby our young people will be included in the broader economy. So we're focused on not only what I spoke to you about earlier, the Tech Startup Accelerator, which is working in schools, but really broadening out STEM so that here in District 5, which is the school district where Silicon Harlem is located, they have the top flight programs for students learning robotics, computer science, urban environmentalism, and a big area that's a tremendous opportunity space is data science, really getting young people into the data sciences, from actually knowing how to generate data to how to visualize data. Here in the city of New York, actually, our chief data officer is an African-American brother by the name of Amun-Ra Mashariki. So we also have role models in key positions that we also can point to so that the students really see, hey, there's opportunities in the tech space for me.
And, I remember just 3-4 years ago, Silicon Harlem was just an idea, and it's just been really inspiring to see Silicon Harlem grow. I was really, like I said before, I was just blown away when I was supposed to go to another reception downtown, and then I decided to ditch that and go to yours. And I'm so glad I did, because that MIST facility is just fantastic. Bruce, it's been a privilege having you on the show. So thanks once again for joining me. I just want to ask you a few more questions and then we'll close. Sound like a plan?
Yeah, sounds good.
All right. On this podcast, we like to talk about policy and entrepreneurship, but also about what makes successful people like you tick. Tell us, Bruce, what are some habits, tactics, and apps that you use every day to stay on top of your game?
Well, first, I'll speak to the fact that as a middle-aged professional, I follow the old saw of sleep is the middle-aged man's tonic. So I get a decent amount of sleep, because I wake up at 5 and 6 in the morning and I'm at it every day. So perseverance is very important. And also working with other people. It's important that we're surrounded by other people. We hear their ideas. We kind of use it as a way to get a sense of what's happening in the community. And we work with young professionals. We really are working closely with a number of millennials, because, they're ears are to the ground and they are into things that I'm not into. And we've been lucky that we attract them. Otherwise, I have a very serious work ethic. And but I also have to say, I've been blessed because I'm a highly educated individual. So that's one reason why education is so important to me. But I've had the opportunity to go to some of the best schools in the country. I've had the opportunity to be a part of a great many of these leading edge initiatives. So I think that is what I bring to the table, along with how that then is complemented by my partner, Clayton Banks, who brings his corporate experience. So together, we have that type of shared expertise. And just to speak to how I was raised to have this value system of giving back. So I think that's very important, that you give back, but not necessarily because you're doing it through a nonprofit, but you're taking sophisticated business principles and advanced science and technological know-how and applying to our communities. And that's where it's very different. But I think it was spoken to, even by Dr. King when he talked about social engineering. Well, now we're doing it because we've got the tools that we can use for that. So that's what's a little different. And then you have to be respectful of your elders. So we work with our community boards. We work with our chambers of commerce. We work with organizations that truly are non-technological, but we learn how to coexist and complement. So that's how you build this ecosystem.
And Bruce, let's turn to a book that you're recommending to everyone you meet, maybe a book that you regularly recommend to some of your students.
I'll give you two things that I think are important to read. One, this is the book and the experience that got me set in this direction. And it was the Structure of Scientific Revolutions. And I might not have the correct title, but it's by Thomas Kuhn. And it's where he coined the term paradigm shift, where he actually talked about how you have these moments in time where everything comes together and it creates a different set of circumstances, and how technology is a part of that. And I was able to have the pleasure of reading that book while I was a student at Princeton, which is 40 years ago. But that was the book and the class that sort of set me on this path of inquiry around the information age and what it was possible. And what I learned in that was that education would always be important, especially in the information age. So teachers would be more important than ever. Lifelong learning would be key. And that really resonated with me because of how I was raised growing up in an all-Black community in Lutherville, Maryland, and the importance we put on education. So that's a book, The Philosophy and Structure of Scientific Revolutions by Thomas Kuhn, Kuhn. And I recommend that book, and it gets talked about quite a bit. I would also say for anyone who's very focused on understanding how our children learn in the digital age, an article that I co-wrote in 1992 with Eric Stroman called Constructivism, Technology, and the Future of Classroom Learning. And in it, we talk about Constructivism, which is how children learn based on finding meaning. It's what gives rise to project-based learning. That's why it's effective. And more than ever, it's important because collaboration and teamwork are key to working in the information age, in the digital age. So that can be whether you're in a team, such as, our Tech Startup Accelerator, or if you're working with someone online and telecollaborating. But once you look at the kind of creativity and genius that students have and how they can augment that by working in teams, here's where you start to get the kind of innovations that will lead to various types of breakthroughs, both scientific and social. So I would suggest those two things.
Thanks again, Bruce, for joining me. And do you have any final ideas you'd like to leave with the audience before we close? And where can folks find you online?
They can find Silicon Harlem at siliconharlem.net. And what we would like everyone to do is come to our website and join as a member. It's free, and you basically get tied to all of our events as well as to our newsletter. And what it does, it will keep you abreast of our initiatives and our opportunities. Plus, it's important as a membership organization because it helps us build our brand and helps us extend our reach. I can be reached at bruce.lincoln@gmail.com. What I'd like to leave with people is we're in an unprecedented inflection point where we've got the opportunity to actually address some of the historical issues facing the African-American community. And the technology will be the enabler that will let us put in place the solutions put forth by not simply Du Bois, who talked about the talented 10th, but we now can actually reach out and do the type of economic development that Booker T. Washington wrote about in Up From Slavery, and that Marcus Garvey talked about when he said that what we need to do as the people who have just recently been released from bondage is build a premier class of scientists and engineers who were taught to harness the science of capitalism for the purpose of changing the economic circumstances of those who have historically been enslaved.
You've been listening to Bruce Lincoln. Bruce is the co-founder of Silicon Harlem, which is focused on transforming Harlem into a hub for tech and innovation. He's also the senior fellow of the Columbia University Institute for Tele-Information at the Columbia Business School. Bruce, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you, Joe. It's been a real pleasure. Let's keep making this happen.
And that concludes episode 41 of the podcast. Thanks so much to all of you for listening. If you have a chance, hit me up with a rating and review in iTunes. It'll take you 10 seconds, maybe 20. Head over to iTunes, give it a rating and review. It helps the show tremendously. So I appreciate that. And aside from that, I will see you back here next week. Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Washing Tech Policy Podcast. You've been briefed.